Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys enjoyed that free audiobook I put out earlier. Let's talk about this fun little topic, which I have been familiar with for nigh on 20 years since my days as an undergrad, a music undergrad, and I see more and more people becoming aware of it. This is the bourgeois fantasy of socialism. And what you'll see is somebody from the bourgeois classes, let's say, usually artists or art majors or literature majors, describing what they're going to be doing after the communist revolution. And almost always they're going to be describing them doing what they want to do, what they would do anyway, and getting paid for it. And also probably doing it in a quantity that they feel they ought to be able to do it in. So maybe, working a couple hours a day. Well, after the communist revolution, you may have stumbled across Twitter threads that do this, or I think they have the same thing on Tumblr. I've seen a couple of them. After the communist revolution, I'll be teaching organic gardening and art. It's like, are you? When I was in music undergrad, it was the faculty that had this attitude even more than the students. In fact, much more than the students. There was a resentfulness among a lot of the music faculty regarding, I guess, where their place in society was, even though they made like six figures not having to do all that much. But they weren't highly regarded and their music wasn't popular and spread all over the place. And they blamed capitalism for it. So their fantasy involved replacement of the capitalist system with the socialist system, in which their pure, perfect art would be able to be recognized as what it is, and they'd be paid to create art without the worry of capitalism, the oppressive nature of capitalism, forcing you to create your art in a way that the capitalist system wants it to be created. And of course, this is fantasy, because in a socialist system, you wouldn't be paid to just make the art that you feel like you want to make. You wouldn't be paid to make the art that you happen to think is good. Rather, you would make the art, if you are afforded that opportunity, you'd be making the art that the state needs you to make. And for the most part, the people who engage in this fantasy, their art is really bad. They aren't making art. One of the reasons their art is unpopular is it's bad. It's not good. Most people don't like it. Maybe they're making really harsh atonal music that most people are just not going to like. Or they're doing, postmodern art of like, here's a portrait of the Virgin Mary made out of cow dung that nobody wants to see and is offensive. Or here's a crucifix in a glass of urine. Of course, this one's very famous for getting a National Endowment for the Arts money thrown at it. But they want to make this postmodern art that's like a pure expression of their angry feelings and get paid to do it. And the capitalist system doesn't pay them for it. Actually, it does, but they aren't quite aware of it. But the capitalist system doesn't make them a famous artist because people don't like their art. Well, in the socialist system, they wouldn't pay you to make that art either. How does that art uplift the working man? How does that help the workers? How does that raise the spirit of the nation? It doesn't do any of those things. It's just offensive and ugly to look at. So chances are, under the socialist system, not only are you not going to get paid to make that art, but you may actually be prohibited from making that art because it's subversive. It's subversive to the state. It's counter to the revolution. It undermines the nature of the state, and it doesn't reinforce the revolution in any way. So you'll be prohibited from making the art. So really, under the capitalist system, even if you're making art for free, at least the Western capitalist system, because it's quite possible to have lots of economic freedom and not necessarily have political freedom. Political freedom may depend upon economic freedom, but it doesn't necessarily always derive from economic freedom. But, in the capitalist West here, you can make whatever art you want. And if people choose not to pay you for it, that's their business, but you don't get locked up for making your art. Whereas in, say, the former Soviet Union, you could actually get put in like a mental institution if you were making art that was considered subversive to the state. And chances are you'd have even less time to make your art, because what you'd actually be doing is working in a factory or working in the fields. These little threads about what I'm going to do after the socialist revolution, none of them say, I'm going to work in the slaughterhouse. I'm going to work in sanitation. I'm going to work in the shoe factory. I'm going to work in the toilet paper factory. What they say is like, I'm going to teach children organic gardening. We don't need children to learn organic gardening. What we need is people to be producing food for the nation. We need people to be producing shoes because people need shoes. So the I guess the schism here is they're thinking that somehow the problems they have with the economic system that they're in will be alleviated by changing to another economic system. Well, command economy, whether you have a command economy or an undirected free market, they're both trying to make things that people need, right? So the socialist system is trying to figure out making shoes and making food for people. It's not just letting people do whatever they want and somehow giving them food. Somebody has to grow the food, right? Somebody has to make the shoes. So whether it's a command economy or it's a free market, it still is depending upon somebody's idea of what other people need. In the free market, it's everybody deciding for themselves what they need. And in a command economy, it's somebody else directing the economic resources to try to provide the things that people need. Now, we don't have to get into a debate over which one's superior. You're probably watching this in a free market country anyway, so you may have an idea over which one produces wealth to a greater extent and with greater ease. But regardless of which one you have, the point is it's what people want or what people need, and people don't need self-indulgent, angry postmodern art. They just don't need that. The Soviet Union had a lot of directives towards music over the course of its lifespan. We don't have time to get into that. But one thing that they didn't create was the harsh and ugly music that was made in the West during the 20th century. It's quite a contrast, actually, to listen to Soviet music, Soviet classical music versus, say, the academic music of the capitalist West. And one of the weird things that happened is that these people who are complaining about capitalism and believe that capitalism is somehow the reason that they don't have some high status in society. Really, they're already in like upper middle class bourgeois places, hence why they were able to be literature majors at like an Ivy League university or something like that. But people like, I don't know, Milton Babbitt, I'm going to just use him as an example. You can look up his music. You'll probably hate it, but he was a professor at Princeton, right? He got paid a lot of money to teach other students how to make bad music and to make bad music himself. So really it was under a weird perversion of the capitalist system where there's so much extra resources, we can just throw money into universities and pass out 5-10 grand here or there at National Endowment for the Arts to bad art. So the only way that you really get paid for making bad art is actually in the capitalist system. So the bad artist really should be super thankful that the capitalist system hasn't cracked down and like destroyed these weird little parasitic organisms called like universities and things like National Endowment for the Arts, various little government programs that siphon off all of that excess resources from the free market and then concentrate it, giving it to friends who make bad art. So really it's under the capitalist system that you actually could make any kind of living at all, being able to produce the art that you feel like producing. Now I say this as a fairly self-indulgent artist. I produce the books, I produce the music that I really feel like I should produce. I don't completely disregard like readers or customers. I have readers in mind for whenever I'm making a book, or I have hopefully listeners in mind that I think might like the music, but ultimately I'm making it the way that I feel it ought to be made. And if nobody buys the book, nobody has to. That's on me. If nobody buys the book, then I didn't write a book that people want to read. That's no big deal. At least I wrote a book that I think was cool and I wanted to write, but it's nobody's fault that they didn't buy my book. It's not the fault of capitalism that people didn't rush out and throw money at me to make the book that I felt like writing. How is that the fault of them if they didn't want to buy the book, right? So in a voluntary system, I can do whatever I want and I can take the risk and I can accept the consequences. In the socialist system, I probably wouldn't be able to write the book at all. And I certainly wouldn't be able to publish it and offer for people to read it, even if they only pay me a small amount of money, or even give it away for free, because it might be subversive to the state. And if the state views it that way, then I won't be allowed to publish it at all. So that's the fantasy. I've been seeing it for like 20 years. It's very, very common in arts departments. For whatever reason, they have this belief that somehow they won't be the ones baking food. They won't be the ones working in a factory. And in reality, if you look at most socialist revolutions, that's the first thing that happens is they flip the classes around. Is if you are in one of these privileged bourgeois classes, you're put out into the fields, you're put into the factories to basically reform you into a worker, into a member of the proletariat. So these people look at themselves and they think that they're working class and never had a dirty job in their life. Now, I am probably unabashedly bourgeois, But I've had a few dirty jobs in my life. I've worked at a chicken plant. I've worked in ag. I've done mechanic kind of stuff, fabrication. I've done all kinds of dirty jobs with my hands. I've been a worker, at least. So at least I have some idea of what it means to actually work with your hands. I think most of these people who engage in this sort of thinking have never really had a job working with their hands in their life. They don't really know what a member of the proletariat is supposed to be, or what the working class even is. These are the people who tell you that rednecks aren't working class because they're white or something like that. That people who are poor don't necessarily qualify as working class because of some other racial attribute they have. They're completely disconnected. After the socialist revolution, they'd be having to deal with Commissar Bubba, not their friend from the literature faculty at the university. No, your friend from the literature faculty at the university and you are both going to be working in the factory so that you can be reformed into a proper worker, and in order to balance out the inequity that capitalism has produced. So anyway, guys, leave me your thoughts down below about this particular little fantasy, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great one.